Hello, welcome to Coffee and Crime. I'm Stephanie, the adult programming coordinator. Tonight we are going to talk to Detective David Owens with the Greenville County Municipal Multi-Jurisdictional Drug Enforcement Unit. That's quite a mouthful. Um, and we will be discussing opioids and the book Dr. Dealer. For those who haven't read the book, Dr. Dealer is about a New Jersey doctor, Dr. James Kauffman, who hired members of his drug trafficking motorcycle gang to kill his wife. On May 10th, 2012, April was found shot to death in their home. In the fall of 2018, the leader of the motorcycle gang, the Pagans, went on trial for drug dealing and for arranging the death of April in exchange for $500 or $50,000 from her husband, who was not only practicing medicine but one of the most prolific drug traffickers. The story is about one man's descent into evil and the people he took with him. This is a story about the doctor who helped flood the streets with opioids, about a husband who hid dark secrets from his wives, and a man so consumed with greed and arrogance that he thought he could get away with murder. And before we get to Detective Owens and talk about the book, if you have any questions, all you have to do is add them into the comment section below, and we'll get to them the best we can. And you will be entered to win a $5 gift card to Ninja Warrior Coffee House. Since we can't give you coffee, this is the easiest way for us to get some coffee with our crime. So I am going to pass it over to Detective Owens. Tell us about yourself, and you're currently on mute.
Sure.
And so tell us about yourself. And
Sure. Yeah. Again, my name is David Owens. I work for the Greenville Police Department. I've been here a little over 20 years. I've been in narcotics. July will be 9 years. I'm assigned to the Greenville County Multi-Jurisdictional Drug Enforcement Unit. We just call it the Drug Enforcement Unit, or DEU.
That's a lot easier.
Yeah, it is. So I have a couple of primary jobs here. I have a narcotics detection canine. One of the other things I do is I follow up on overdoses and drug overdose deaths. Here, I try to keep up with the stats, and I also try to find the sources of the opiates that these victims die from.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have a presentation for us today.
I do. I have a quick PowerPoint to go over with everyone. It's somewhat general. It's about opioid misuse in Greenville County. Again, it's not just about the book. This is just information that I have about Greenville County, about opioid misuse and kind of the trends and the things that we're seeing now. Some of the things will be similar, but most of it will be much different from what's inside the book. And again, I told Stephanie I'm only up to chapter 8, so I've not completed the book yet. But I think you'll see that around here, the trends are much different from what happened in the book. So we'll go ahead and get started with the PowerPoint. Stephanie, can everybody see it?
Yes, they can now.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, just a brief overview about the unit that I work in. The DEU, Drug Enforcement Unit, we're comprised of investigators from Greenville County, the city of Greenville, and all the other municipalities within Greenville County, Simpsonville, Travelers Rest, Malden. We started the unit in August of 2019. The goal of the unit is to target mid to upper level drug traffickers in Greenville County. Essentially, we've just pulled all the resources from Greenville County and all our smaller municipalities together instead of all working separately. And we fluctuate around 25 investigators in the whole unit. We have several intelligence analysts, and we have my K9, so we have a lot of resources here. So the next thing I'll talk to you about some common prescription drugs that are sold on the street. and price ranges, what the pills, prescription drugs go for on the street. And again, this is in Greenville County. Pickens County, probably very, very similar to this. So oxycodone, this is a picture of a 30 milligram oxycodone tablet, the same ones that Dr. Kauffman primarily was prescribing. And I think he prescribed some of the benzodiazepines as well, but this is obviously the medication he was prescribing mostly. They go roughly for $1 a milligram. So a 30 milligram tablet usually costs between $20 and $30 on the street. A Norco or a hydrocodone acetaminophen, they'll usually $3 to $10 per tablet. Percocet, that is oxycodone and acetaminophen, they're $10 to $30 on the street, depending on the strength. And not all these medications are opiates. So I have here Adderall, which is an amphetamine tablet. They go $5 to $20 on the street, again, depending on the strength. Suboxone. Suboxone is buprenorphine. What they are, they're sublingual films or strips. This medication is designed to help people who are trying to wean themselves off of opiates, but it is sold illicitly on the street. They're $20 to $30 per strip. And then I put this alprazolam, that's a Xanax. So the 2 milligram Xanax comes in various strengths. 2 milligrams the most popular, and they'll be $3 to $10 per tablet on the street. And I like to tell people that prescription drugs or any illicit drug, it's just like any other market. The more you purchase, usually the less you'll pay per tablet. That's why there's such a wide variation in the cost per tablet. And then I have down here other benzodiazepines like Klonopin, Valium, Ativan. They'll go like a Klonopin will probably be one of the cheapest. That'd be $1 per tablet, up to $8, depending on the tablet and the strength. So I'll give you an example of some old trends. This is a case study. This is one of the first cases that I worked when I began working narcotics, as it relates to like a prescription medication. The dealer in that case was a 66-year-old female. She had no prior criminal history. I had a confidential informant that would purchase medication from this female. So this woman, every month, she filled legitimate prescriptions for hydrocodone and clonazepam, which is Klonopin. In 2011, hydrocodone was primarily sold as Lortab. Many of you may have heard of that medication, so Lortab and Klonopin. So over several months, my informant purchased these medications from her, and this female was on government assistance, so she paid little to nothing for the medication, so she made a lot of profit off of that. This type of case study was very common back then. So the early 2000s up until maybe 2014, it's less likely around here now, and I'll explain why in a few moments. So what changed? So October 2014, kind of the similar time frame as Dr. Kauffman and the Dr. Dealer in the book, the DEA changed the scheduling of products that contained hydrocodone. Around here, back then, like I said, between 2000 to 2014, Lortab or hydrocodone was probably the most popular, or at least we found it most commonly on the street, more commonly than oxycodone. They changed it from a Schedule III drug to a Schedule II drug. And what that did is it made it more difficult to get on the street because the doctors couldn't prescribe as much and as often. So this resulted in tighter restrictions on opiate-containing medications. So as a result, the legitimate supply, or I say legitimate supply, the legitimate supply that came from doctors, less of that was reaching the street and was being sold illicitly because of those things. So these factors have contributed to the trends that I'm about to explain now, specifically heroin and fentanyl and all of the deadly overdoses that we're seeing now. So what are those other factors? Widespread availability of fentanyl and fentanyl analogs. When I say analogs, I mean carfentanil, acetylfentanyl. Those are all just different analogs of fentanyl. The chemists in China that make it, the illicit fentanyl, they can just change small parts of the chemical structure to change it. The production of fentanyl in these labs and mass production of counterfeit prescription drugs in illicit pill mills. And I'll show you some examples of that. So essentially, when the supply chain tightened from the prescription drugs that were coming from doctors, these illicit drugs have taken the place or filling the demand. So this, and you don't have to try to read the small print. I'll kind of explain this diagram. This diagram shows where the supply of illicit fentanyl is coming from. And if you can tell, everything's coming from China. So the illicit fentanyl and the precursors, or the building blocks to make illicit fentanyl, are all made in China, and they're all shipped from there to North America, either Canada, the US, or Mexico. Once it gets to North America, drug dealers will take that illicit fentanyl, and they use pill presses, and they'll stamp out contraband or counterfeit pills. Or they'll take the precursors, and they can make their own illicit fentanyl here. And that has become more common. So this is a picture of an illicit pill machine that we seized, our unit seized last February. The machine that you see there up in the top left of that photo, they're capable of cranking out about 3,000 to 5,000 pills an hour, I believe. To the right of the machine, you see a bag that's powder. That's just the binder and the substrate for the pill. There'll be some dyes. And so they take all this mixture, they mix it up, and they pour it in this machine. And that machine mechanically cranks out these counterfeit pills. And I'll show you some examples of those. So here's in the same house where we seized the pill press machine that I just showed you. Those blue pills, they look very much like oxycodone tablets, like the ones Dr. Kauffman was prescribing. And here's another lab, pill lab that we seized last March. The pill press machine you see to the left, that was very similar to the one I just showed you. It was at a different location. This is in a garage in Greenville County. That pill press machine was actually broken. So the pill press machine you see on the right is a mechanical hand press machine. You have to hand stamp the counterfeit pills. These pill press machines require maintenance. And because when they're pressing out these pills, it creates a lot of dust, and it requires a lot of maintenance to keep them going. Most of the time, the dealers don't perform the maintenance, so they end up breaking down a lot. So you'll see the broken machine. That's an electrical machine there, and then a lot of times you'll see these hand press machines as well. And then around the hand press machine, you can see some of the powders and stuff they were using to press the counterfeit pills. Okay, this slide here, this is a representation of a do-it-yourself synthesis lab. This would be equipment that you would need to take the precursors that come from China, and make illicit fentanyl from those precursors. I went to a training class last year that was put on by the National Guard down in Columbia, and they showed us basically how to take the precursors all the way through to make illicit fentanyl. And it's not very difficult if you have the precursors and the equipment and the motivation to do it. Okay. This is a close-up of the finished product of what I showed you earlier. And as you can see, these are pretty obviously, if you look at them closely, these are counterfeit pills. The color is mismatched, it's uneven. The score marks and the numbers and the letters are not stamped in very well. These pills here, they don't contain oxycodone. These pills will contain heroin, fentanyl, or a mixture of heroin and fentanyl. And these are the tablets right now that most people are overdosing and dying from. these counterfeit tablets that are on the street. This is just a kind of representation of why people are overdosing from these pills, besides the fact that fentanyl is very strong and is many more times stronger than heroin. So if you can see there, it shows a tablet matrix. That's what I was talking about, the filler and the dye and things like that. Well, then if you see in the middle, the active substance, when the dealer blends that with the product that they use to stamp out the tablets with, they don't blend it evenly. And as a result, you'll get a batch of pills. Some will be very strong and have a lot of active ingredient. Some will contain no fentanyl or no heroin or no active ingredient. So when the end user buys these pills, they don't know how much of the active ingredient is in there. As a result, sometimes they take a pill and nothing happens. Sometimes they have the desired effect, and sometimes they take it and it's too strong and they'll die from an overdose from it. So I'll give you a snapshot of this year of the drug overdose problem in Greenville County. These are very conservative estimates. These are numbers that I have come up with from reading over reports. These are not official numbers, but from time to time, usually about once a week, I'll go through the reports and I'll look for the drug overdose and add it to a spreadsheet. So since January 1st, we have about 100 I shouldn't say non-fatal, 100 total drug overdoses in Greenville County. That's just since January 1st. Of those, approximately, we believe 27 have resulted in death. Now, it'll take several months for all of the reports to get back from the coroner's office to confirm those. But as of right now, we have about 27 of those cases where it appears from the evidence at the scene that it was probably an accidental drug overdose. And then at the bottom, I put these numbers greatly underrepresent the actual numbers of overdoses because many go unreported because of the availability of naloxone or Narcan. Naloxone is a drug that if someone's having an overdose, it can be administered nasally, and that will counteract the effects of the opiate. So, and luckily, naloxone is widely available now. So a lot of people that use opiates have naloxone, so their friends or family are able to save them, and most of the time they won't call law enforcement. So there's no way to estimate the total numbers, but I'm fairly certain that they're grossly underrepresented. So just real quick, so what are we doing here at the Drug Enforcement Unit to combat this? So we're targeting the mid and upper level dealers of the heroin. Since last year, we've seized there's been at least 3 or 4 of these counterfeit prescription pill mills that we have seized, the pill presses. And then on the other end of that, I do the investigations from the user end of it, from the victim side of it. I work closely with the homicide detectives to go out to these scenes, try to gather evidence there, and try to find out where the victim obtained the pills or the powder that we believe killed them. So those are the 2 strategies that we use here at the Drug Enforcement Unit to combat this. And I'm open for questions.
Okay. My first question is just out of curiosity, since 2020 was the way it was, did any of the restrictions and like the confinement either escalate or de-escalate these numbers from previous years?
No, not at all. I can't remember the numbers from 2019, but I think the 2020 numbers were very similar, or maybe went up. So I checked before we started here. So last year in Greenville County, 2020, we had 121 opioid-related deaths, overdose deaths. So, and I can't remember 2019 numbers, but I'm fairly certain that went up. Now, there were some effects on the drug trade from COVID because for a time the border was locked down. So some of the meth prices and stuff, the supply went down, so the prices for meth went up. But as far as opiates go, it didn't have any effect.
Okay. How does opioid distribution and compare to meth as far as availability and predominance in our community? And by our, I mean upstate. You don't have to specifically know.
Yeah, sure. So I think that for the most part, they're two different populations. Now, there are some people that use meth and opiates, but methamphetamine is a strong stimulant. Opioids are a strong depressant. So you kind of have two different populations. But I would say right now, those are the two biggest drug problems, methamphetamine and opiates. And it's just kind of, they're two separate populations. People that are addicted to opioids mostly use opioids. People that are addicted to meth mostly use meth. They do mix a little.
Does our community seem to do one more than the other, or did it just really, since it is just either or, it's kind of a 50-50 split?
That's a hard question to answer. I would say it's really probably a 50-50 split, if I had to guess.
And again, if you have any questions for Detective Owens, please feel free to ask it in the questions below. And you could be entered to win a $5 gift card for Ninja Warrior Coffee House. Jennifer, I'm not sure exactly what your question was, or the pill. So if you could resubmit your question, because I don't completely understand the full question. But just to kind of talk about the book a little bit, for Dr. Dealer, it is the story about, this is April Kauffman. She was the one who, her husband, Dr. Kauffman, who ran the pill ring, he was the one who had her murdered. There's two of them side by side. That is her daughter, who who from the beginning said that she thought he was responsible. And so I just kind of wanted to show a couple pictures of them. Oh, here we go. Oh, Jennifer wants to know, it seems like the pill machines will be hard for people to get. Why are they hard to get?
That's a great question. So the pill machines, the high-end ones that really crank out a lot of pills, they're very expensive. If I remember correctly, they're $3,000 to $10,000. And it depends on where you get them from. The really high-end ones come from Germany or in Europe, and they're very expensive. The lower end ones, that usually the ones we find, come from China, and they're much cheaper, but they seem to break down a lot more. So what people have to do is they order them on the dark web. I'm not sure if your readers or listeners are familiar with the dark web. So they order them on the dark web, and they have to come over, and they come through customs and come across the border. Sometimes Homeland Security intercepts them. Sometimes they don't. I wouldn't say they're difficult to get. They're just expensive. They require a front end investment from the dealer. So.
I will say, for me, dark web, what I know is what I've seen on TV.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I just know it exists. I don't know how to use it to get to it.
I couldn't tell you that either.
Yeah.
I just know what, we found it on the dark web.
And that's a great question, because that is one of the biggest trends now, is the dark web. People even within the United States order drugs from other people in the United States on the dark web. It's all anonymous. They pay through the dark web, sometimes with cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And it makes it a lot more difficult for us because it's all anonymous.
Laura wanted to know what we could watch for at schools to see, for telltale signs.
Education for kids.
Telltale signs for opioids being dealt, I guess.
Okay, for a school, for kids. So I would just say, just very general, like changes in your kids' behavior, maybe a new friend group they hang out with. Opioids will repress. So people will be tired or they'll sleep a lot when they take them, things like that. So, but the first signs are going to always be, you know, kids, they're changing behavior, they're changing their peer group, maybe misbehaving. Now, I don't have teenagers. My kids are 6 and 3, so I haven't gotten there yet. But that would be what I'm looking for.
And what about how to tell who would be dealing at a school?
Yeah, that's,
you don't know.
No, I mean, it could be anybody. It really could.
Nina wanted to know, if you suspect someone is selling pills, how would you go about reporting it?
So there are several. That's a good question. There are several ways. If you want to do so anonymously, you can do it through Crime Stoppers. You can do that through telephone. You can do it online. Of course, you'd remain anonymous. They just give you a number. You can, whatever jurisdiction you live in, I'm assuming it's Pickens County. If you live in Easley, you call Easley PD. You could leave an anonymous tip. You could call Pickens County Sheriff's Office, leave an anonymous tip for their vice narcotics guys. Or you live in another small municipality, you do the same thing. Usually, probably the easiest way is to do it at Crime Stoppers, and they'll funnel it to the correct jurisdiction.
How often is that the route that leads you to find somebody, or is it, or
Through anonymous tips?
Yeah. Is that a successful way to find, or is it usually because another crime has occurred which brought it to attention?
So
what I'm saying makes sense.
Yeah. So we get a ton of Crime Stoppers tips.
Okay.
Yeah. So Crime Stoppers is a very good way. So on my end, what I do is when I can go out to an overdose scene, I do. But there's a lot of them. So I go out to the scene, look for evidence, interview people there, family members. They may know where the family member got the pills or the powder from. Another great source of information is obviously a cellular phone. If we can get into a cell phone of a victim, then usually they'll have communications on there with their dealer. We're able to identify them that way.
Just a question about the book.
Mm-hmm.
Were you surprised it took 6 years for those responsible for April's murder to be arrested? Is that kind of typical in a case like this?
It's not typical in cases that we work. We don't typically deal with biker gangs and that type of thing. I'm not surprised, though, in that environment, when you're dealing with motorcycle gangs and you're dealing with things like that. I think they're hard because they don't talk. There's not going to be a lot of people that are going to cooperate with law enforcement. So I think that, no, I'm not surprised.
How common is it for doctors to be involved in illegal drug distributions?
I think it's uncommon. I think it's a lot more uncommon now because of what I mentioned in the PowerPoint slide. When the federal government changed those scheduling and tightened down on the prescribing of those. Now, absolutely, occasionally you're going to have a doctor here or there, but to the extent that Dr. Kauffman was doing it, it was much more common then. Before I came to narcotics, sometimes I would work on the highway and I would stop cars. People traveling from West Virginia, other states, going to Atlanta just to go to, they would tell me, I'm going to my doctor, my pain doctor, going to a pain clinic. It was much more common then, I do believe. I did a little bit of Google research on this, and there have been some, the feds have recently closed down and arrested some doctors just in the last year or so. I think it was like in Kentucky or Ohio, and Texas was another one, I believe, that was on a really large scale. But I think those are at the back end. I think it's much more difficult for doctors to do that now. And there's other databases too, like primarily in this state, DHEC, they have investigators that kind of monitor prescriptions and prescribers and things like that. They have a system, a database that I don't have access to it. And they can see which doctors are prescribing which medications and how much. And they can also look at patients, and doctors can look at patients as well for patients they may suspect that are doctor shopping. And they can go on that system and they can see, okay, this patient has been to these other doctors asking for the same opioid. So they'll know not to prescribe it to them. So only DHEC and physicians have access to that system.
Well, I was also wondering if, because after listening to your presentation, I was wondering if that kind of also came into play because it looked like that, when things started happening as far as this drug ring being, or, the drug ring and the murder being detected was pretty much when the crackdown and changes happened, like 2014, 15,
Yeah,
when they were starting to make the changes that would
right.
have, because even after her murder, up until he was arrested, he was still doing it. So I'm wondering if that was part of the reason why.
It could have been, but I would imagine, and back then around that time frame, it was well known to law enforcement and the feds that pill mills were a huge problem, especially in states like Florida and your bigger cities. You could just name Atlanta, the
Yeah.
Northeast. So I think that the feds, and it had been a problem for a long time then. That's why they moved to restrict the prescribing of those drugs. So I would think, besides the whole biker gang thing and all that, I don't think it was as nearly as uncommon then it is now. I don't think that it happens near as much now. I think it's much more closely monitored now.
Um, would there be, Beth wanted to know, any indications that a doctor was involved in a pill mill? How would you be able to tell?
So I'm going to say a few general things. One of the DHEC investigators would be a lot more suited to answer that question. I would say just in general, if a doctor that maybe has an inordinate amount of traffic that's uncommon, and I don't know what a common amount of traffic for a physician would be. We don't work those types of cases,
Yeah.
but if they have, just a lot of patients in and out all the time, the pharmacist would know because they see the prescriptions and they fill them. And DHEC would know because they can monitor those things. But I would just say amount of traffic. If one physician has a much more amount of traffic coming to their office than another physician, that might be
Tip
one.
off.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer wanted to know, can a person be arrested for selling pills that were prescribed to them?
Absolutely. Yeah. If it's a controlled substance, one of those benzodiazepines, opioid, pain medication, schedule 1 through 5, it's distribution just like any other illicit drug.
Let's see. And you kind of already hit that this really is uncommon. His situation and the way he ran it down. What do you think motivated Dr. Kauffman to commit these crimes? Was it greed, narcissism, or pure evil?
Yeah, we briefly talked about this before, and like I told you, I'm just a cop, but we talked about how he lied about serving in the military, and so it appears to me, psychologists might say differently, but narcissism was the root of this, and then that led to greed, and that led to everything else.
And how would you say is the best way that the community can help stop drug trafficking? So how can we help you?
That's a great question. So if you suspect something like that, and some of the common things, that we see all the time on the anonymous complaints are, hey, I have a neighbor, and maybe a new neighbor moved in, and there's just people in and out all hours of the night. Strange activities, strange smells. We used to get those a lot more when meth labs were bigger. But because meth is so cheap, we don't see meth labs nearly as much. But just any unusual activity around you, if you see especially traffic in and out, drop one of those anonymous tips.
A question, just because you did say the meth thing. I have learned of 2 different meth busts somewhat near me. Yeah. But I do know that one of them had been reported multiple times. What is the criteria that makes it to where they could actually go in and find? Because it's like basically they'd been called out multiple times, but they'd never had gained entry, I guess, into the building and found their meth stash.
Yeah, so I would need more specifics about that. I'm not sure. Did the cops, did they serve a search warrant, or they just
Well,
knocked for, and
basically, I think that the complaints were initially for weird goings on late at night, a
Mhm.
couple who was fighting loudly,
Yeah.
domestic violence, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. So it might have not been we think they have meth, but just that more so
Just
complaints.
yeah,
And so
sure.
maybe that's the reason why it didn't
Pro-
escalate.
Probably, yeah, probably. And yeah, I mean, and realize too, like it takes a lot of evidence for us to be able to serve a search warrant, and it takes a lot of time as well.
That's
A lot of people, they see these strange things and they get frustrated with us because more is not done. But we have to kind of cross our T's and dot our I's and make sure that we do things correctly before we can, especially go in someone's house. You have to have a search warrant before you can do that. But those things eventually work themselves out. If that kind of thing is going on, eventually it'll come. There'll be enough evidence eventually. It just takes us a lot of time. There's just so much of it. It takes us a lot of time to get to it.
and you want it to be prosecuted, so you got to make sure those steps
Sure.
are in place.
Yeah.
Because if you jumped the gun and it wouldn't be a good option. Anybody else have any questions for Detective Owens about the book or about opioids or about any of his detecting over the years? Any other thoughts that you wanted to share with anybody?
No. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I enjoy talking with everybody. Other than that, no. I mean, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Okay, I'm going to give it a few more minutes because somebody's going to be bringing me in. I'm going to draw for the names of
Okay.
for the winner for the Ninja Warrior Coffee House. She's bringing me in for COVID reasons. She's in a different room. Would we be ready for this to be over? Okay, and the winner of the $5 gift card is Nina Stewart. Congratulations. We will be in touch with you on how you will receive your $5 gift card. Thank you all for listening and participating. And again, thank you so much, Detective Owens, for agreeing to be a part of Coffee and Crime. And we hope you all join us next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.